In the autumn of 1967, the war in Vietnam has settled into a strange equilibrium. Across the country, American units are piling up impressive numbers. Operation Cedar Falls, Junction City, Manhattan, the great sweeps through the jungle north of Saigon, have killed thousands of enemy soldiers and uncovered vast tunnel complexes and supply caches. By the metrics the American command has chosen to measure the war, things are going well. The body counts are favorable, the kill ratios are lopsided. And yet the enemy keeps coming back, into the same zones, along the same roads, in undiminished strength. This is the central puzzle of the war in 1967, and it sits underneath everything that happens on the morning of the 17th of October along a small jungle stream in Binh Duong province that almost no one in America has ever heard of. The men who walk into the ambush that morning belong to the 2nd Battalion, 28th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. They call themselves the Black Lions, a name the regiment has carried since the First World War, when the 28th Infantry fought at Cantigny in the first independent American offensive of that conflict. It is a proud lineage. In a little under 3 hours of fighting, the battalion will lose 64 men killed, including its commander and every member of his command group, with 75 more wounded and 2 missing. It is one of the most lopsided defeats suffered by an American battalion during the entire war. And in the days that follow, it will be reported to the public as a victory. That outcome was not an accident of the jungle. It grew out of the strategy that produced it, and out of a way of thinking about the war that had quietly taken hold inside the American command. By the middle of 1967, the enemy has absorbed a punishing series of blows. The large search and destroy operations of the previous winter and spring have cost the Viet Cong dearly in men, infrastructure, and supplies. For the North Vietnamese leadership, this raises an uncomfortable question about whether their forces can survive a prolonged contest of attrition against American firepower. The answer they arrive at is counterintuitive. Rather than withdraw, General Tran Van Tra argues that the war can still be won, but only by inflicting as many American casualties as possible, for as long as possible, until the United States concludes the cost is unbearable and goes home. This is a strategy aimed not at the battlefield, but at the American public and the American political clock. The figures do not have to favor the Viet Cong, they only have to be high enough and visible enough to matter back in the United States. It is the mirror image of Westmoreland's own attrition strategy, and arguably the more realistic of the two, because it targets the one resource the United States cannot manufacture, the patience of its own people. This is the logic that brings the Viet Cong 9th Division back into the field in the 3 Corps area north of Saigon in the second half of 1967. And it changes the character of the fighting in a way the Americans are slow to recognize. The Americans believe they are hunting a weakened, retreating enemy. The enemy, in at least some cases, is now hunting them. The man responsible for the 1st Infantry Division is Major General John H. Hay, who took command earlier in the year. Hay is a careful officer, and by September his caution is showing. The scale of enemy activity across 3 corps has begun to puzzle the American command. Attacks on bases, probes against outposts, contacts that flare up and vanish. The pattern does not fit the picture of an enemy in retreat. In response, Hay makes an unusual decision. He temporarily suspends his division's large-scale operations, which have been producing diminishing returns, until he can work out what the enemy actually intends. It is a sensible instinct. The trouble is that working out the enemy's intentions in the dense jungle of the secret zones north of Saigon is very nearly impossible. The operation that draws the Black Lions toward Ong Thanh is called Operation Shenandoah II. Its objective is straightforward and unglamorous. Highway 13, the dirt road running north from Saigon toward the Cambodian border, has to be kept open, and the stretch from Son Thanh to Loc Ninh runs through country the Viet Cong use freely. Hay knows the 9th Division traditionally uses September and October to rest and refit before its winter-spring offensives, and he intends to disrupt that rest. So in late September he orders elements of the division into the Long Nguyen secret zone, a stretch of dense jungle between Highway 13 and the Michelin rubber plantation, about 35 miles northwest of Saigon. The enemy unit moving into that same zone at almost exactly the same time is the 271st Regiment, commanded by Colonel Vormin Triet. It is one of the most experienced Viet Cong regiments in the country. But here the war produces one of its quiet ironies. The 271st has not come to Long Nguyen to fight. It has come to eat. Triet's regiment is supposed to receive food and replacements to prepare for a major offensive, and it finds neither. The American search and destroy operations of the preceding months have done real damage to the enemy's supply situation in the region, and there is simply no rice to be had. Triet's men go days without adequate food. The local Viet Cong units who are supposed to help are themselves short, so Triet does the only thing he can. He digs his hungry, experienced soldiers into well-prepared bunker positions, and he waits. The same American operations that have starved his regiment are about to deliver an American battalion into the killing ground he is preparing. It is a pattern the war repeats with grim regularity, success in one column of the ledger quietly setting up failure in another. The early stages of Shenandoah II produce the same frustrating rhythm that has marked the whole season. Contacts flare and die away. On the 2nd of October, an army of the Republic of Vietnam unit operating near Con Thang runs into a large enemy formation and takes heavy casualties, and captured documents indicate the South Vietnamese clashed with the battalion sent to cover the movement of the 271st Regiment into the area. The ARVIN, it should be said, are doing their share of the fighting and their share of the dying in this campaign, a fact easily lost in an account centered on an American battalion. A few days later, the war hands the American command a genuine success, and in doing so may set a trap of expectation. On the night of the 6th of October, the 1st Battalion, 18th Infantry, under Lieutenant Colonel Richard Cavazos, is attacked at its field position. Cavazos is an exceptional combat leader, later to become the first Hispanic 4-star general in the United States Army. His battalion holds its ground through a night assault with the support of artillery and mortar fire, and when it is over, the Americans have lost 5 killed against substantial enemy losses. A captured prisoner later reveals that one enemy battalion alone lost 59 killed and 56 wounded in the fight. 5 days afterward, the 1st Battalion, 18th Infantry, probes north again, takes fire, executes a disciplined withdrawal behind a second company, and calls down artillery and air support that leaves 21 enemy dead for the cost of a single American. These are textbook actions. They are also, in a sense, misleading. By the middle of October, they have convinced Hay that the 271st Regiment has taken a serious beating and is preparing to slip out of the Long Nguyen secret zone. He is, in fact, getting ready to wind down Shenandoah II. The reality is not so clear-cut. The continued enemy activity near the Ong Thanh stream, where the 1st Brigade is making most of its contacts, suggests the 271st is not leaving at all. It is concentrating. This gap between what the American command believes and what is actually waiting in the jungle is the hinge on which the entire battle turns. American intelligence reads the falling off of large contacts as a beaten enemy in retreat. The enemy is neither beaten nor in retreat. He is dug in, hungry, and waiting for a target. The man who will lead the Black Lions into that gap is Lieutenant Colonel Terry de la Mesa Allen, Jr., who took command of the 2nd Battalion earlier in the year. His name carries weight. His father, Major General Terry Allen Sr., commanded the 1st Infantry Division itself in the Second World War, leading it through North Africa and Sicily before being relieved in a controversy that left a mark on the family. The younger Allen grew up in the shadow of that legacy, and he carries it into Vietnam as the commander of a battalion in his father's old division. He is a serious, driven officer who wants his battalion to perform. How much that ambition, woven through with the weight of his father's name, shapes the decisions of his final days is something no one can finally measure. On the 8th of October, Allen is ordered out from the base camp at Lai Khe with 3 of his rifle companies, A, B, and D, and is airlifted to a position northwest of Con Thang. His Company C is detached to protect the supporting artillery of the 15th Field Artillery. This leaves Allen with a battalion already reduced below full strength, a detail that will matter a great deal within 10 days. The battalion itself reflects a deeper problem in the American war effort by 1967. The Army's individual rotation policy, under which men serve 12-month tours and rotate home as individuals rather than as units, means veteran soldiers are continuously cycling out and green replacements continuously cycling in. The result is a battalion in which experience is perpetually being drained away. The men of the 2nd Battalion, by most accounts, lack extensive combat experience. The enemy they are about to meet, the light infantry of the 9th Division, are tough, disciplined, and very experienced indeed. It is a mismatch the rotation policy produces again and again all across the war, and one no amount of firepower fully corrects. On the morning of the 16th of October, the day before the battle, Allen leads 2 of his companies out from their night defensive position along the Ong Thanh stream and into the thick jungle to the southeast. After moving about 2 kilometers, his men find a fortified enemy bunker complex. What follows is a careful, methodical action of exactly the kind the situation demands. Allen pulls his men back and calls in airstrikes. When the bombing is over, his men enter the camp and are met by snipers firing down from the trees. He pulls them back again, forms a perimeter to protect his wounded, and brings artillery down on the bunkers. The battalion re-enters the camp and finds 17 enemy dead. Pushing through to the western end, they run into an estimated 60 more of the enemy. Allen makes the prudent call. He breaks contact, calls in further airstrikes on the camp, and returns to base, unwilling to be drawn into a fight that might run into nightfall. So far, this is the portrait of a competent commander handling a dangerous situation with appropriate restraint. What happens next is harder to explain. That evening, senior officers of the 1st Infantry Division fly into the battalion's camp. They praise Allen's men, and they present a Silver Star to 1st Lieutenant Clark Welch, the commander of Company D, for his actions that day. Welch is the kind of company commander soldiers follow without question, an officer with a feel for the ground and for his men. And it is after this visit, with the brass having come and gone, that Allen makes his fateful decision. He resolves to launch a full frontal assault the next morning against the same enemy base camp, to find out whether the 271st Regiment is still there. Welch, who knows the ground and knows the strength of what they touched the day before, objects. He tells Allen the battalion does not have enough men for the job, and suggests that Allen either call off the assault or bring in reinforcements before going in. These are the words of the officer best placed to understand the risk. Allen dismisses them, and in a decision that says something about the relationships inside the battalion, he takes the lead role in the assault away from Welch's Company D and gives it instead to Company A under Captain James George. It is worth pausing on what the plan actually amounts to. A frontal assault by an understrength battalion missing one of its 4 rifle companies. With inexperience, 10th of October, the battalion moves out. Company A leads, followed by the battalion command group, with Company D covering the rear. Company B stays behind to guard the base along with the mortar sections. In accordance with brigade policy, Allen marches on the mantling of an American rifle company by an enemy who has chosen the time, the place, and the geometry of the engagement. The cloverleaf patrols, the marching artillery, the careful approach, none of it has mattered, because the enemy has simply allowed the Americans to walk deep enough into the horseshoe before springing it. The first sergeant of Company A, José Valdez, does what he can, organizing an assembly area on the eastern side to gather the survivors. The wounded George turns his shattered company over to Valdez. Allen orders the survivors, mostly men from the 2nd and 3rd platoons, to withdraw northward through a perimeter formed by Company D, and it is as this withdrawal begins that the trap closes on the rest of the battalion. As the survivors of Company A pull back, Company D begins taking fire from its southern flank. Allen orders his command group to hold in place near a prominent anthill, with 2 platoons of Company D, while the 3rd platoon pushes forward to help the wounded men of Company A. Then comes one of those small moments that decide battles. The soldiers of Company D hear the distinctive sound of an M60 machine gun firing from their southern flank. Allen, fearing his own companies have become confused in the jungle and are firing on one another, orders a ceasefire. The order passes down the line of Company D, but the M60 is very likely an enemy weapon, one of the captured guns, and the ceasefire does exactly what the enemy needs. It hands the 271st Regiment fire superiority at the decisive moment. At around 11:30, Triet commits his reserve battalion, held back until then, and it strikes Welsh's Company D from 3 directions. Allen tries to call in artillery, but it is now impossible. American and enemy soldiers are too close together, intermingled in the jungle. What the Black Lions have lost in a little over 2 hours. The battalion commander, dead. His command group, dead. The commander of Company A, gravely wounded. The platoon leaders of the lead company, dead. The battalion went in with somewhere between 142 and 155 men. 64 are killed, 75 wounded, and 2 missing, the better part of the force gone in a single morning. Against this, the American command will claim the enemy lost over 100 dead, but only 22 enemy bodies are ever seen on the field, and only 2 recovered. An American infantry battalion is built around a chain of command, and that chain has been systematically shattered from the top down. The men who survive do so largely through the efforts of junior leaders and individual soldiers acting on their own initiative, because the structure above them has ceased to exist. Around 20 past noon, Colonel George Newman flies in to take command of the shattered battalion, while Brigadier General William Coleman takes over the brigade. Company A links up with Company B, which has moved out from the base to help the wounded. By 2 in the afternoon, Company C is airlifted in. Coleman, coordinating the evacuation from a helicopter, decides to gather the American dead in one place and protect it with artillery fire. By then there is little left to fight. Triet has already ordered his regiment to disengage. This is worth dwelling on, because it explains the shape of the battle as clearly as anything. Triet does not overrun the surviving Americans, though he is in a position to inflict still more damage. He chooses to withdraw. His reasons are entirely practical. His men are exhausted and hungry. He is behind schedule for his next assignment. And above all, he fears what American air power and artillery will do to his regiment once it is no longer pressed up against the American units. He has achieved what his strategy requires, a heap of American casualties at a favorable cost, and he leaves while the leaving is good. The restraint here is not mercy. It is the same cold arithmetic that has governed the whole engagement. For their conduct in the battle, the men of the 2nd Battalion receive a remarkable number of decorations, which is itself a measure of the ferocity of the fighting and the courage of individuals caught in a disaster. 13 soldiers are awarded the Silver Star. Allen and Welch both receive the Distinguished Service Cross, and 2nd Lieutenant Harold Bascom Durham, a forward artillery observer attached to the battalion that day from the 15th Field Artillery, is posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, having continued to direct fire and warn other soldiers even after he was badly wounded and blinded. The survivors of Companies A and D are pulled back to Laiquet to absorb their losses and kept away from contact. There is not much of those companies left to send anywhere else. And then comes the part of the story that in many ways is the most revealing of all. The American military tells the press that the fight at Ong Thanh was a major American victory. The men who survived the ambush know better. They have not won anything. They were lured into a prepared killing ground and torn apart, and they say so. The official body count, by the assessment of those who later study the battle closely, is almost certainly inflated to support that story. This is where the small battle along the Ong Thanh stream opens up into the larger tragedy of the war. The body count is the central metric by which the American command measures progress in the absence of front lines or captured territory to mark the war's direction. A metric meant to measure progress has instead begun to distort it. When a defeat can be reported as a victory simply by adjusting the count of enemy dead, the number stops describing reality and begins to replace it. The men in the jungle know exactly what happened to them. The reports flowing up the chain of command and out to the public describe something else entirely. The gap between those two accounts, between the experience of the battalion and the story told about the battalion, is the gap that will eventually swallow public faith in the entire war. There is a further irony in the timing, the kind the war seems to produce without effort. The destruction of the 2nd Battalion at Ong Thanh is, in the enemy's design, a piece of a much larger movement. The rest of the 9th Division is already preparing for a major attack on Loc Ninh, near the Cambodian border, which will unfold at the end of October. And both of these are preliminaries, part of a wider pattern of border battles, drawing American attention and American units toward the frontiers, away from the cities and population centers. Within 3 months, the enemy will launch the Tet Offensive, striking those very cities in the most dramatic reversal of the war. Ong Thanh is one small thread in that design, a single battalion bled white in a jungle clearing as part of a strategy that aims not at the jungle at all, but at the will of a nation half a world away. The post-war assessments of the battle, including those written by men who served in the 2nd Battalion, settle on a consistent set of causes. The failure of intelligence, which leaves the battalion blind to the regiment waiting in front of it. The overconfidence of a command that believes the enemy is beaten and leaving when he is in fact concentrated and waiting. The decision to launch a frontal assault with an under-strength, inexperienced battalion against the advice of the officer who knows the ground best. The rotation policy that keeps American units perpetually green. And underneath all of it, the seductive logic of attrition, which encourages American commanders to seek contact and measure success in enemy dead, playing directly into the hands of an enemy whose entire strategy is built on making that contact as costly as possible. Colonel Vo Ming Triet, the enemy commander, survives the war. Decades later, he meets Clark Welch, the Company D commander who survived his wounds, and offers an assessment of the battle that no body count could capture. On that day, he says, no one won. It is a generous thing to say to a former enemy, and not entirely accurate, because by the terms of his own side's strategy, Triet won precisely what he set out to win. But there is a deeper truth in it. A battalion that loses 64 men in 2 hours and is then told it has won a victory has not won anything a soldier would recognize as victory. And an enemy who must dig his starving men into bunkers and wait, unable even to feed them, can hardly be said to be winning a war. The arithmetic of attrition produces outcomes that satisfy no one's idea of victory while consuming, relentlessly, the lives of the men sent to satisfy it. That is the machine the Black Lions walk into on the Ong Thanh stream. And it is the same machine scaled up across a decade and a country that will in the end defeat the side that built it.